Prime Minister Mark Carney spoke to reporters from Sydney, Australia within the last hour, where he expanded on Canada's position on the strikes by the United States and Israel on Iran.
We took a position because we view the nuclear threat and the export of terrorism of Iran over decades as one of the gravest threats to international peace and security. And the Americans and the Israelis haven't taken this action. In that limited sense, we supported that aspect. That is not a blank check. That is not us participating. That is not us asking for something in exchange for that. None of that is true. That is just a straight-up position.
The Power Panel is here with their analysis. Lisa Raitt is a former Conservative cabinet minister. Emily Nicolas will be joining us shortly from Le Devoir. Nathan Cullen is a former NDP MP and BC NDP minister. And here with me in studio is Michelle Cadario. She was Deputy Chief of Staff to former Prime Minister Paul Martin. Michelle, I'm going to start with you. What did you make of the way that the Prime Minister sort of cautioned his support of one of the initial goals of the U.S. and Israel, which is to ensure that Iran never has a nuclear weapon, but he sort of offered, it's less of a blanket statement of support. What did you make of it?
Yeah, no, I think it's the first time that we've heard from the Prime Minister after all that's happened over the weekend. And so he was able to contextualize a lot more than just his statement on paper. And I think it was important to hear from him. He was able to kind of talk about why, in the immediate aftermath of the strikes, that he did offer, the support and of what the Americans and the Israelis did insofar as recognizing that it is a terrorist state, that many Canadians have died. Just in the last few weeks, 15,000 people have been killed because of the demonstrations against that regime. And they can't have a nuclear weapon. It is a real danger to the world. But at the same time, he's now very much calling and hoping for immediate de-escalation. And that, not to see this into an even broader conflict and an ongoing war. And so I think that he's hoping that there are other countries, and certainly offering up, I think that Canada, if there's a role to play, that they're certainly happy to play that in trying to now, create whatever it is as a new normal, and most importantly, to stop people from dying further.
Nathan, did you think that the Prime Minister needed to offer some more context around his initial statement where he suggested he didn't suggest, he said that Canada was supportive of the United States' actions to prevent Iran from obtaining a nuclear weapon? Why do you think that the Prime Minister had to sort of offer that context, and what do you make of it?
Well, because I think it, in some ways, contradicts his call for the rule of law, international law, and other things that he made quite an impression on the world and on Canadians at his speech from Davos, lamenting the loss of that international order and that illegal actions should matter. And they certainly matter to middle powers, because we rely on that law much more so and adhere to that law much more so than the great powers, and particularly the United States. I think he's probably had some time to reflect, because there was a risk for the Prime Minister. Let's all take the terribleness of this regime in Iran as a given, and its replacement as something very desirable if it were a more peaceful outcome. I would suggest two things, given our long history in the region as Western powers. That first, Mr. Carney, in sanctioning what Mr. Trump was doing, was not just aligning himself with this moment and the decision that had been made without the US Congress, et cetera, but also potentially aligning himself with the outcome, which is my second point. That from the air alone, and even when committed boots on the ground, the outcome of these types of events does not generally, in the majority of cases, lead to something better. Oftentimes it leads to something worse. And that's not to say that we don't resist these regimes, but taking actions as Mr. Trump has taken unilaterally or along with Israel doesn't necessarily mean that suddenly Iran or is even likely to become a peaceful democratic nation. Often in these cases, and the examples are riddled throughout the map, what comes next can be just as bad or worse. And Mr. Carney needed, I think, to make some daylight between himself and Mr. Trump. I don't know if he's done that with his statement today. I think it'll depend on how it's received and what more he has to say on it.
Lisa, what do you make of the Prime Minister's initial statement and sort of his expanded context today?
So he's given the why, and he's talked a little bit about what they won't do or how far the why will get them in terms of supporting the United States. I have great concerns about the people who are Canadian who are in that area who are stuck. And that's where the government really has to step in. This is where the government has a real role to play, as opposed to being on the sidelines, commenting on what other people are doing. This is where they have to be doing something. Katie, I have a neighbor. He is in Dubai with his family. There's 26 of them. 12 of them are under the age of 12. They're there for a wedding, and they're stuck in a hotel. And it's really difficult for them to be able to find what they're supposed to do, how they're going to get connected. And they're calling everybody that they possibly can. That's where the government has to step in. That's where members of parliament have to step in and be ready for these kinds of real issues of people needing to find a way to safety. And I'm not saying that the government has to necessarily go in and grab everybody. I'm just saying they need to get real information out to people in a serious way. And it really does matter in the short term that they give that kind of comfort to people.
And Lisa, before we get to Emily, I want to ask you, correct me if I'm wrong, but if I'm remembering from my very long days ago covering Parliament Hill, you're a former Minister of Transport, correct?
Yeah.
So what kind of work would go into something as large scale as this to help get Canadians out of a dangerous region?
I mean, I think I read that the Prime Minister or the government's trying to figure out a way to get through Oman. But listen, the logistics of that are a nightmare. I don't even know whether or not you can physically do that at this point in time. You'd have to have some serious negotiations about safety in the air. But what people need to have is a lifeline back to Canada, knowing that people know what's going on and what they're trying to do and that they're kept in the loop. And that's where the government can come in. I don't think we can do a flotilla to get people out of there, but people do need to know what next steps are, because silence is what's really distressing.
Emily, I want to ask you, what was your main takeaway about what the Prime Minister offered in terms of this sort of broader statement that he made in response to what's going on in the Middle East?
I think there's day by day a little bit of a cooling off of the tone. When you look at the first statement that the Prime Minister issued on Saturday morning, if I'm correct, that was before it was confirmed that basically we had just witnessed the political assassination of the leader of Iran. And so since then, there's been while the trip in India, Anita Anand yesterday made a statement that was a little bit more distant from what the U.S. position has been, and now you're seeing once again slightly more distance as well. But I think it's going to take time to Mark Carney to actually speak more plainly about where Canada is going to stand in all of this. I think one of the main takeaway we should all need to take from what Donald Trump said yesterday in terms of his reasons for doing this. He spoke about oil, and he spoke about weapons of mass destruction, echoing the Iraq reasons to invade back in 23. But he did not, 2003, sorry, but he did not speak of democracy. He did not speak of women's rights. He did not speak of civil liberties. And we have the blueprint of what happened in Venezuela to have a clear view of what is the goal here from the White House. And we certainly have as well from Netanyahu's regime in Israel an idea of what their priorities are, which is basically Lebanon and Palestine, and nothing to do necessarily as well with the direct liberation of the Iranian people. And so when I hear Mark Carney speak about the Iranian peoples themselves, I hear criticism, but it's so veiled right now that it is incredibly ineffective at getting us anywhere. And if we've learned anything from Mark Carney since the time he's been in power, is that he's probably making a lot of phone calls with people in Europe, trying to have that non-American Western bloc aligned before they take further steps as well.
The other main issue that the Prime Minister spoke about today or was asked about today is what's going on in India and where the Prime Minister stands on foreign interference. Journalists pressed Carney for clarity on Canada's position.
I will tell you that there is progress on these issues, and that progress is a product, in my judgment, it's a product of the resources we're putting in. It's a product of the clarity of our position. We will not tolerate foreign interference, transnational repression by anyone, and I stress by anyone. There's a wide range of countries who make these efforts from time to time. And we will call it out and we will engage with it in a way that is as effective as possible to protect Canadians, and that's what we're doing.
Michelle, the Prime Minister was asked directly multiple times whether he would still label India as a threat. What do you make of what the Prime Minister had to say today about where things stand?
Well, I think we have to recognize first he's like on the heels of coming from India, and he is there trying to delve into and get more economic opportunities for Canada. They signed a big uranium deal, which was pretty important and substantial. And I think that what he's trying to do is to set some boundaries and guardrails about what's acceptable in terms of Canada, and kind of just try and start a new path with India. It's there's 1 billion people there. It's a huge market, a growing middle class, I think that the issue is that you've got to kind of balance. Whether your trade partners are exactly who you would like them to be and share all of your exact same values or not. But at the same time, he's got to protect Canadians, he's got to protect our democracy, he's got to protect our voting, and to make sure that interference is stopped. That starts, I think, in Canada, making the right kind of investments in terms of our security systems and actually our security apparatus as a whole. And I think that they're moving towards doing that in terms of a lot of the defense stuff that they're doing. So I think that he is, as I said, forging a different path on this. The direct questions weren't probably the most comfortable ones, but I think that he is, trying to make a new path in a way that doesn't offend, but it still stands up for our own values.
Nathan, what do you think of how the Prime Minister sort of addressed that and where things need to go in case Canadians aren't necessarily comfortable, even though, the Prime Minister outlined all these safeguards and actions that his government is taking?
Well, I actually don't know what those safeguards are. There's probably more detail behind them just with respect to what is exactly and explicitly changed. We understand that because of all of the disruption and the antagonisms and attacks from our major trading partner, that more trading partners are required. I can remember the old heady days in the 90s where we would couple trade with the idea of values, that we would trade and try to bring other countries into our trading groups, and also expect or hope that they would also reflect some of the things that we cherish, like human rights, not murdering people in foreign countries that you don't like, et cetera. No one's that naive anymore. Those were the Clinton days, and now we're here. I think Mr. Carney has a lot of room with respect to China and India, obviously, places where Canadians have not been as comfortable, explicitly because Mr. Trump has been so awful. Yet, I think you would put a lot more meat on the bone with respect to how is it that we're not going to have the Indian government or actors within the Indian government interfere, threaten, and involve themselves with Canadians and Canadian citizens who they disagree with politically and whatnot, because I don't think Prime Minister Modi is swayed in one way or the other. He runs his country the way he does. It's pretty aggressive, and it's not something that Canadians are necessarily used to and wouldn't be comfortable with, especially when it's happened on our borders. And our security officials are still recognizing that India represents a problem, and there seems to be a gap between them and the Prime Minister, and that isn't always a good thing.
Lisa, what do you think?
Well, I think that the Prime Minister probably wishes that he didn't have these issues of foreign interference or foreign people on Canadian soil killing Canadian citizens. I mean, obviously, those are two pretty major issues, and you're trying to do trade deals with the countries that have been accused of doing these things by the Prime Minister the previous prime minister himself. So the world isn't perfect. The prime minister, Prime Minister Carney, has to respond to these questions. He has to have a good answer. I don't know whether or not that was the right answer. I don't know whether or not it was a good answer. It was a holding line, I think. But if the media is going to do the role and the job that they should do, they're going to dig down further and further and further on this question, because Nathan is right. It is a balancing act of what our values are, what we stand for, and what kind of trade we're going to do. You know, it's interesting to me that in the world, we seem to be always trying to put people as bad guys or good guys. The United States currently is a bad guy. China may be an okay guy. India is a good guy. That's not the way the world works. We have to do trade around the world. But at the same time, we don't swallow ourselves whole and deny the fact that these things did happen, that we do have to make sure that there's pieces in place that it'll never happen again, because it can't happen again, either in terms of election interference or the threats that are happening with respect to some of the people in our country right now. And I think they are continuing on, quite frankly. It all gets murked up, though, quite frankly, because of the fact this official came out and said that there's nothing to see here. So again, Mr. Carney has to have a control on his government and on his officials to make sure that that kind of mixed messaging doesn't come at him.
And Emily, I'm going to give you last word on this. You know, what stood out to you about what the Prime Minister had to say on this and the position that he finds himself in?
He finds himself in a very tricky position, especially if you want to, you know, stand for Canadian values, whatever those are, and our reputation around the world. We need to realize that in much of the global South, the biggest threat to Canada's reputation is being perceived as the United States lapdog, and it's been the biggest threats to Canada's reputation for long before Donald Trump was in power. That being said, I'm worried about the impact our getting closer to Modi's regime could have on the Indian diaspora here in Canada, especially those who come from faith and communities that have been under attack by Modi's regime. And I also think that to be able to understand what's going on from the Indian perspective, we need to also connect that with what's happening in Iran and the cutting of oil supplies that the Israeli-American operation is currently trying to do. India has already been hit by the geopolitics of Russia and now Iran in terms of their ability to have access to oil, and there's other countries who will be impacted by the geopolitical conflict that we're seeing now unfolding. And so some of our data, some of our analysis of the situation and what's in it for us, but also what's in it for them, is changing in real time. And I'm sure that there's been some hallways conversation about this while the Prime Minister and the Minister of Foreign Affairs were doing that mission there. And I think that was probably way more fascinating than some of the things they actually had to say to the podium.